How many different versions of World of Warcraft are there? Let's start with the retail timeline, and then we'll move on to the more messy times. In November of 2004, Blizzard released the original World of Warcraft, an MMORPG where players could create a character on one of two opposing factions, where they could then level from 1 to 60 in the sprawling world of Azeroth, and upon reaching level 60, they would then gain access to a variety of iconic raids, such as Molten Core, Onyxia's Lair, Blackwing Lair, Zul'Gurub, Ahn'Qiraj, and Naxxramas. In January of 2007, Blizzard released the first expansion to the game, known as the Burning Crusade, giving access to the world of Outland as well as two new races, the Draenei and Blood Elves, and allowing players to take their characters up to level 70, where they could then enter raids such as Karazhan, Serpent Shrine Cavern, the Eye, or Tempest Keep, Battle for Mount Hyjal, the Black Temple, and Sunwell Plateau. The next expansion, Wrath of the Lich King, would come in November of the following year, which sent players back to Azeroth and to the frigid continent of Northrend. This expansion also brought the first new class to the game, the Death Knight, and allowed players to progress to the new level cap of 80 and do raids such as Naxxramas, again, Onyxia's Lair, also, again, Vault of Archivon, Ulduar, Trial of the Crusader, and Icecrown Citadel. Then, in December of 2010, Blizzard released the expansion known as Cataclysm, which brought completely revamped versions of Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor following the reawakening of Deathwing, the corrupted aspect of the Black Dragonflight. This expansion brought two new races, the Worgen and Goblins, but at this point Blizzard also made the decision to only raise the level cap of 5 instead of 10, taking the new cap only to 85. Some of the notable raids in this expansion include Barad Hold, Blackwing Descent, the Bastion of Twilight, Throne of the Four Winds, Firelands, and Dragon Soul. The next expansion would end up being Mists of Pandaria, released in September of 2012, which took players to the hidden Isle of Pandaria, home to the Pandaren, the new playable race available to both factions. It also brought a new class, the Monk, and raised the level cap to 90. The notable raids of this expansion include Mogushan Vaults, Heart of Fear, Terrace of Endless Spring, Throne of Thunder, and Siege of Orgrimmar. Following Mists, in November of 2014, Blizzard released Warlords of Draenor, where players could level to 100 in an alternate past version of Draenor, the home planet of the Orcs, which would later become Outland in the main timeline. This expansion is famous for being one of the most hated expansions of all time, due to its rushed nature causing most of the content to end up being cut, and for having severe stretches of downtime between content phases. There were no new races or classes added in this expansion, as Blizzard decided to update the player models of each one instead. This expansion only had 3 raids, High Maul, Blackrock Foundry, and Hellfire Citadel. In August of 2016, Blizzard released Legion, where players once again returned to Azeroth to explore the Broken Isles amidst another demonic invasion. This expansion brought with it a level cap of 110, a new class known as the Demon Hunter, and introduced a new system known as Artifact Weapons, where players would obtain famous and/or powerful weapons from the game's lore and upgrade them throughout the expansion's lifespan. The raids for this expansion were the Emerald Nightmare, Trial of Valor, the Nighthold, Tomb of Sargeras, and Antorus the Burning Throne. 2 years later, in August of 2018, Blizzard released Battle for Azeroth, attempting to bring back the faction war aspect of the game. In this expansion, players could level to 120 in 2 new continents, those being Kultiris and Zandalar. This expansion also introduced what are known as allied races, which are generally just different versions of existing races. The ones introduced in this expansion include Void Elves, Lightforged Draenei, Dark Iron Dwarves, Kultirans, Mechagnomes, Nightborn, High Mountain Tauren, Mag'har Orcs, Zandalari Trolls, and Volpera. To replace the artifact weapon system, Blizzard introduced the Azerite gear system, which was heavily criticized for almost being exactly the same, but just worse. The raids for this expansion include Uldir, Battle for Dazara Lore, Crucible of Storms, the Eternal Palace, and Ny'alotha, the Waking City. Next up is Shadowlands, which was released in November of 2020 and allowed players to explore the afterlife of the Warcraft universe. Unfortunately, it has the reputation of not only being the expansion with the worst story, but the one that essentially ruined the stories of every previous expansion due to its excessive amount of retcons, or actually moments, as I like to call them. Additionally, the replacement of the Azerite gear system, the Covenant system, which allowed players to select from one of 4 new factions to align themselves with, each with a powerful new ability, ended up just being the same system as before, with slight variations and even more problems. However, this expansion was the first and only one so far to enact a level squish, where all level 120 characters were brought down to level 50, and the new level cap would once again become level 60. Similar to Warlords of Draenor, there were no new races or classes added in this expansion, and there were only 3 raids, Castle Nathria, Sanctum of Domination, and Sepulchre of the First Ones. Then we have Dragonflight, released in November of 2022, where players could explore the previously hidden Dragon Isles. It included a new race class combo known as the Dragthyr Evokers, and raised the level cap to 70. Other than the introduction of the dragon riding mechanic and the revamped profession system, there's not really a whole lot to say about this one, other than that it was generally received pretty well, and it was around this time that Blizzard kind of realized that people didn't really like playing with the same regurgitated power systems over and over. The raids for this expansion include the Vault of the Incarnates, Aberys the Shadowed Crucible, and Amidrasil the Dream's Hope. And finally, we have the War Within, our current expansion, which was released in August of 2024, where players can explore the land of Khaz-Algar, which includes a variety of locales such as the Isle of Dorn on the surface, and 3 underground zones known as the Ringing Deeps, Halifal, and Azj-Kahet. No new classes were added in this expansion, but for the first time since Battle for Azeroth, a new allied race was added, the Earthen, which is available for both factions. There's currently only one accessible raid for this expansion, that being Nerubar Palace, but the next raid has been confirmed to be Liberation of Undermine. So that's pretty much the retail timeline. As you can see, it's pretty simple, just a straight line. But before we get into the mess up Classic, there are actually 2 versions we missed. Back in March of 2024, Blizzard released a new game mode to retail called Plunderstorm, which is a pirate-themed 60-player battle royale where players would be dropped into Arathi Highlands, where they could then level up by killing NPCs and obtain various different abilities scattered throughout the map, which they would then use against other players and attempt to be the last one standing. Its reception was mixed, but either way, the event only lasted until May 1st, and it hasn't returned since. 16 days later, Blizzard released WoW Remix Mists of Pandaria, which allowed players to create Time Runner characters, which were exclusively locked to content from the Mists of Pandaria expansion, although their abilities remained as they were in Dragonflight. These players also received a legendary cloak that could be continually upgraded as they progressed, as well as gems that could be socketed into their gear for a variety of incredibly strong passive effects, or sometimes even abilities from other classes. Players could also receive a unique currency during this event, which they could then spend on old mounts and transmog sets from the expansion, as well as reskin variants as well. However, this event ended a few months later in August, and just like Plunderstorm, it is no longer playable. Alright, so we have 2 little branches here, but that still leaves us with only one playable version of retail. So let's back up a little bit and start the Classic timeline, which shouldn't take nearly as long to explain, since it's primarily made up of re-releases. First, there's World of Warcraft Classic, which was released in August of 2019, and was a recreation of the original game from 2004, relying on the final patch of that version for class balance. At the conclusion of this version, in June of 2021, Blizzard split the Classic timeline in 2, progressing one half into Burning Crusade Classic, and leaving the other permanently stuck on the last phase of Vanilla, creating the version which is now referred to as Classic Era. However, just a little bit later in this same year, Era received a fresh set of temporary Classic realms as part of Season of Mastery, which included an experience buff, a faster phase schedule, as well as raids with scaled up boss encounters. Returning to the progression timeline of Classic, in September of 2022, Burning Crusade Classic was progressed on into Wrath of the Lich King Classic, with no consideration for Burning Crusade Era realms. And in August of 2023, Classic Era gained the addition of Hardcore realms, one life servers where players are unable, for any reason, to resurrect upon dying. Then, in November of the same year, Season of Mastery was succeeded by Season of Discovery, an experimental version of Classic with new abilities, dungeons, raids, and a unique level-based phase schedule. In May of 2024, Wrath Classic was then moved on to Cataclysm Classic, once again with no consideration for Wrath era realms. And finally, just recently on November 21st, in celebration of WoW's 20th anniversary and the 30th anniversary of the Warcraft franchise, Blizzard released a new set of progressive Classic realms, as well as an additional fresh Hardcore realm. And that's pretty much everything there is, but how many versions does this all add up to? Well, from retail, we have the original game, plus 10 expansions and 2 events, equaling 13. Then, the progression timeline for Classic includes the recreation of the original game, plus 3 expansions, equaling 4. And finally, the Classic Era branch includes 2 seasonal versions, the original Hardcore servers, and the fresh Anniversary realms, which also include a fresh Hardcore server, also adding up to 4. This gives us a grand total of 21 different versions of World of Warcraft. And as for the future, we know that there are 2 additional retail expansions in the works, Midnight and the Last Titan, and we also know that in spring of 2025, the Cataclysm Classic servers will progress onward into Mists of Pandaria Classic, and that in 2026, the new Anniversary realms will progress onward into the Burning Crusade, and with all of these combined, this will take our total all the way up to 25 different versions of World of Warcraft. That's certainly a lot, but to be fair, most of these versions aren't really available anymore. So how many versions of WoW are currently playable? Well, if you wanted to keep things simple, you could technically just say 3, as there are only 3 different versions of the game client that you can download on the Battle.net launcher, but in reality, there's actually 7. The War Within, Cataclysm Classic, Classic Era Hardcore, Season of Discovery, Classic Era Anniversary, and Classic Era Anniversary Hardcore.